My God!
This is Nauru. And this is exactly how the country became one of the most richest countries on planet Earth. They made billions just by being on. I'm completely serious. But it all came to an abrupt end. Now at this very moment, in 2022, it has become one of the most poorest and impoverished places on the face of the earth. This story teaches a very important life lesson for us all. This is the tragic fall of Nauru. Nauru is a very small island, measuring just about 8 square miles long, roughly halfway between Hawaii and Australia, with a population about around 10,000. So I know what you're thinking. 8 square miles, population of 10,000. How can this little teeny tiny island be the richest country per capita? I'll tell you. Before the arrival of humans, way before the arrival of humans, the island had been a rest stop for seagulls for 4 million years. Over time, they took huge dumps on this country with no mercy. This isn't just some regular old bowel movement. This was special. The birds produce guano, which eventually over time produces a high and potent level of phosphate, which is extremely important to agriculture because of its high level of nitrogen, which creates awesome fertilizer. And this is in limited supply and is mined all across the world. The birds enrich the island with huge reserves of this beautiful waste. But for years, the people of Nauru didn't even know if they were sitting on, until the reserves were discovered in the early 1900s by Germany. They found gold in their backyard. Nauru later created the Pacific Phosphate Company and started pushing their white substance harder than the Colombians. Money was basically falling out the sky. Their days of poverty was now postponed, and Nauru was. They even removed their trees and plantations to make room for mining. Because hey, who needs oxygen, fruits, and vegetables? Unknown to many, Nauru also played a pivotal role in defeating the Nazis during World War II. I'm joking. They spent most of World War I and II getting captured by Australia, Great Britain, New Zealand, and Japan. Nauru was basically getting tossed around like Kim Kardashian until 1945. In July 1966, they finally picked up their jewels and spoke at the United Nations, calling for independence by January 31st, 1968. On January 31st, 1968, following the 2-year constitutional convention, Nauru became the world's most smallest independent republic. They had gotten their freedom. During the country's previous captures, phosphate mining continued, ravaging the land. Nauru was infested with huge pits and crevices. At the time of their liberation, Nauru didn't have much phosphate left due to mining for nearly 70 years. Concerns began to rise that the island would soon become uninhabitable. So at this point, Nauru observed the situation carefully and cautiously, and mined harder than Australia, the Britons, New Zealand, and the Japanese all put together. Due to the country not splitting profits, they were just trying to make up for lost times. All of this being led by a guy named Hammer D. Roberts. Under his leadership, the country became filthy, dirty, rich. They literally dug their way to the highest GDP per capita in the world for nearly 10 years. Nauru earned $2.5 billion a year for only having a population of 7,000 citizens. But there is a problem with that. Phosphate mining and government services accounted for the entire country's salary. They did have some plans for the future after the phosphate is gone. They balled out and bought stocks, hotels, cruise ships, airplanes, and properties all across the world. But none of them actually worked out. So the country observed the situation carefully and cautiously again, and came up with the best idea they could come up with before all their precious poop is flushed down the toilet. This country went completely crazy, spending money like MC Hammer. People bought houses, a golf course, they built more hotels, they bought an airline with 7 aircrafts in total. Eventually, the beautiful waste on the rocks started to dwindle away. The representatives of the country spent excessive dollars on official overseas travels that included golfing in the Bahamas, traveling to other countries to manage their money, which blew out the budget year by year, to the point where they looked at debt to solve their problems, which is never a good idea. More than $2 million was borrowed. In order to consolidate their debt, they took out another loan for $240 million from from General Capital Division, which was levied against their country's international real estate portfolio. Oops. So the country observed the situation carefully and cautiously for the third time and came up with the best idea they can, since they are seriously close from running out of phosphate. And the conclusion was to invest in a British pop band called 4+2. They invested $2 million in their project called Leonardo the Musical, A Portrait of Love. The musical didn't do so well, and the total investment disappeared like the Mona Lisa, sending them straight down the dark road of bankruptcy. Remember when I told you Nauru removed their trees and plantations? That was also a bad idea. The country was now basically left with gravel, rock, and a polluted beach. After all the intense mining, nothing could be grown there. They then decided to sue Australia by taking them to International Court of Justice, seeking compensation for slapping them around for years.
That's gonna hurt.
Get him!
Australia was ordered to pay $100 million over 20 years to Nauru as compensation. So for the fourth time, Nauru observed the situation carefully and cautiously. They needed a plan to save their already ravaged economy. So what did they come up with? They started doing business with the mafia. You heard that right. And this time, surprisingly, it actually worked. With their backs against the wall, they marketed their small island as a tax haven, offering anyone with a measly $20,000 with opportunity to open a bank account. The Russian mafia laundered $70 million through Nauru in 1998 alone. Plus, Russia gave Nauru a reported $70 million for their kind act of humanitarianism. What a beautiful story. Just beautiful. Years later, Nauru passed out passports like a collection plate at your local megachurch, mainly to the Chinese, but allegedly from individuals from the Middle East, if you know what I mean. But sadly, in 2003, the U.S. Treasury announced sanctions against Nauru over concerns it was a center for money laundering. Nauru agreed to shut down its offshore bank industry. Today, during recent times, more than 70% of their land is uninhabitable. What is even more sad is that Nauru went from obese pockets to obese people in a matter of decades. It has the highest level of obesity in the world amongst men, women, and children. I wouldn't blame it on the citizens. Most of it is due to their poor healthcare system and nutrition. In 2013, only 76% of Naurus live above the poverty line. The country also experienced droughts and lack of fresh water due to climate change. This story shows you that the most important thing about having money is managing it, no matter how much it is. Nauru went from rags to riches and back to rags, down the gloomy road of brokenness, which personally, I commute very frequently. And what I'm about to say is very important. The lesson from this situation is to learn how to manage your